Welcome to this special Christmas in the Labs with Todd. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this desk countdown calendar for Christmas, or maybe it could be put on your mantelpiece if you'd like to. We're going to start off by importing an STL file to create a piece of clip art so we can make this reindeer. And then I'm going to take you through how to make this house from scratch using a really interesting technique that I came up with in our Aspire software to model. Anyway, let's hop into the software. We can look at those techniques and then we can go ahead and review the finished file.
You can start off by opening up the file that you're going to get with this project. Now, you'll be presented with the notes page at first, like you always do. Make sure you read and understand this so that you can go ahead and adjust the tooling so it's safe and appropriate for your setup. So once you're sure about that, you can go ahead and click OK. Now, this is the finished file, and I'm going to just quickly go over this, but we're also going to take this apart, and I'm going to show you some different bits of this and other instances of Aspire, so you get a good sense of how all of this came together. So right now, you'll see that we have two sheets in the view, but if we zoom out a bit, we actually have three. We've got our sheet that's called pine shelf. We've got a sheet that's called rough timber. And then we have one that's called a house dash model. So take a look at our 3D view. You'll see that on the pine shelf, we've got a couple 3D models here. On the rough timber, we just have some vectors. There's nothing in the actual 3D view for that one. And if we go to the house model, this is the actual sheet that I went ahead and actually modeled this house from scratch. Now you'll note that none of these sheets are called reindeer. That's because that came from a model that I've imported in from an external file. So it's an STL file. So let me show you how I did that. We made some adjustments to version 11.5 to make this much faster. So let's go ahead and find that file on my hard drive. Okay, so when you go ahead and download and install this project, you're going to be getting two files. The first one is going to be a Christmas countdown deskcalendar.crv 3D file, and this is an Aspire file. And you'll also be getting a cute reindeer.stl. So first of all, you'll see that the .crv 3D file is associated with a Vectric CRV 3D file. So when I double click on that, it will instantly open up my Aspire and open that up so I can go ahead and edit it or make changes to it if I want to. The cute reindeer is been associated with the 3D Builder. So it's a 3D object and it's associated with Microsoft 3D Builder. So if I double click on this, then it will load up that software. But with new 11.5, what I can do is I can open up this directly into my software, into a default file size or job size, and then I'll be able to work straight from there. Also, if I want to, I can go ahead and associate my .stl extension to Aspire if I want to. So every time I click on a STL file, it'll automatically go ahead and open up my Aspire. So let's go ahead and right click on that STL file, and we'll go down to Open With. And we can go ahead and choose out of that list Aspire 11.5. But if we want to associate this so it always opens up into Aspire, or an STL file always opens up into Aspire, I can go ahead and choose another app. And when I select that, I can choose Aspire 11.5, go ahead and click Always Use This App to open up an STL file, and click OK. The next time I look at an STL file, I'll see that the actual icon has been changed to an Aspire icon. And then when I go ahead and double click on those, it'll open up Aspire for me. So as you can see, that's exactly what happened. Aspire opened up. It created a single-sided job for me with some really basic dimensions here, some default stuff. You can change these if you want to, but for me, this is exactly the size that I need, the way I always create clip art for design and make. Datum set to the center, has a very high resolution because it is a piece of 3D clip art, so I want to make sure that it has lots of pixels to work with, and the material settings really don't matter. As soon as I click OK, I'll be brought right into our dialog to import in a 3D model. And you see there's the 3D model there. It's a cute little reindeer. He looks really nice. Now I can go ahead and choose the options that I need to get him into our software. So first thing I can do is I can look at how I want to actually look at the model, the initial orientation. And for this particular model, it's exactly the way I want. It's top down. So that's the way I want it orientated. If I wanted to change that, of course I could. I could change the model size if I would like to. If I needed a little bit more space maybe, or it comes in a bit small, then I can go ahead and size this up. So let's say I wanted this to be 145 millimeters at my longest dimension. I can click apply and he'll be sized up for that. I can center my model if I want to, but he's already centered for me. So all I need to do now is just position and import him in. There's no need to segment him at all. He's going to be all right the way he is. So let's import and position him. And the important step here is to make sure that your modeling plane is set to the right space. So put it right to the very back of this particular model. I don't want to worry about creating both sides because it's only a single-sided model. I can discard the data below 0. So if I wanted to actually put my modeling plane up inside it a bit farther to remove some of this base height, then I could do that if I wanted to, but for right now it's fine just where it is. And I can go ahead now and click import. Now we've really improved the speediness of the import feature. So there we have it. Just like that, it's super fast to get him in there. And there we have it. I think he looks really great. So at this point, I can go ahead now and right click on the cute reindeer once he's selected, and I can go ahead and export that as a piece of 3D clip art and put it right in the folder where my file is living. I can just go ahead now and save that off. And if I go ahead and look at my file explorer now, you'll see that I have an extra piece of clip art in here, and that's my cute reindeer. Now I can use him in my final file. Let's go back to that final file for a second and take a look at that. And here we have it. So that's what I've done here is I've simply just gone ahead and imported in that reindeer piece of clip art and used him in my job that I have here. So if we go ahead and have a look at a tiled view, there he is right there with some tabs added. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so the next piece of clip art that we're going to need is going to be this house. Now I've come up with a super simple way with one of the new tools in Aspire 11.5 to help you model objects like this. It kind of looks like a gingerbread house with lots of flat areas and just a little bit of 3D shape to it. Now let's open up a brand new instance of Aspire and I'll show you how I did that. Okay, the inspiration for the house in this project came from a doodle that I made at the 2022 Vectric user group meeting that was held in San Diego. We presented in front of a great group of users, and in between some of that downtime, in between presentations, I take a little bit of time sometimes to doodle some things in my planner. So this is one of the sketches that came out of that. I thought that the look of it and the feel of it matched quite nicely with the reindeer that we have, so I thought we could use this. So what I've already done is I've imported that in, that bitmap in. I've cropped it and I rotated it slightly, and I've gone ahead and created some vectors for us to start modeling from. These vectors were created using the basic drawing tools in Aspire. I hope you all know how to use those with the help of the new freehand drawing tool to get this nice organic looking snow on the roof and the chimney. These are all nice closed vectors, so it should be really easy to pull together a nice looking model of this house. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and tile our views. So on the right hand side, we have our 3D view. On the left hand side, we have our 2D view with all of our vectors. So we can go ahead and go to our modeling tab. Now this technique was something that I kind of thought of a while ago and figured that this was the time to use it. So because this looks like kind of like a stack of gingerbread, then this technique is going to work really well to help get me started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of cropped planes, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some base height to those to bring them into shape. And thanks to one of the new features of version 11.5, this is really easily done. So to do this, I'm going to start out working as if this is like a piece of gingerbread sitting on my table from the back up. So first of all, we're going to grab this house outline. We'll go to our modeling tab here, and we're going to create a shape. It's going to be a base shape, okay, or a flat plane with no base height at all, and all of these components are going to be merged in, okay. For now, we'll change those in a bit, but for now they're all going to be merged in. Now we can go ahead and click apply, and you'll see that in my 3D view I'm going to have a shape of, or a shape of this house. Now really there is no shape to this or no height to this at all. It's actually just a modeling plane or a zero plane, but in a second we'll add some base height to that. So let's start a brand new component. And we're going to go ahead and start working through all of these vectors. So in this case, this is the window. So we're going to do the window frame. We're going to select this vector, hold down our shift key, get the inside of that window frame, this one here, and that one here. And we can go ahead and click apply. And then we're going to start a brand new component. And we're going to work through all of the different shapes here. And you notice that not much has changed in our 3D view here because these are all been merged in. So as soon as I click apply and start a new shape, then you'll see that it goes away, but trust me, it's there for us to use in a second. We're going to go ahead and grab the step at the bottom. Now I'm going to go ahead and do all of this exactly the same way as you saw me just do it, but I'll just speed up a little bit to save some time. Okay, there we have it. We got all the base planes that we need to get started turning this into a nice 3D model. So let's go ahead now and start to give these some shape. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to double click on our 3D view, and we're going to select the house here, and we'll click it again. That way we'll reveal our control handles here, along with this new little gadget in the corner that's arrived in 11.5. And what I can do is, normally there would be this box and then a little arrow on top of it. If you pull the arrow up and down, it would change the shape height. And if you move the box, it adds base height. But because when I created this actual component, there wasn't any shape height, I don't get the option to change that. So really all I'm going to do is just move these base heights into place so that I get some definition here. Again, thinking of this as like almost like a gingerbread house, I can go ahead and work through all of my different components here. And choose those and just drag them up to where they need to be. That looks really good, like that, something like that. And I'm simply going to go ahead and move through all of my flat planes and just give them some height. And I'm pulling these, because these are merged components, I'm pulling them through the others to make sure that I get the shape that I want. Now these ones here are windows. If I go ahead and drag these now, I'm going to be giving myself positive windows, which is not what I want. So let's right click on this, and we're going to change our combine mode to be subtract. Now as soon as I do that, if I add some base height, if I pull this up, then what's going to happen is it's actually going to go down, which is what I want. So it's kind of the reverse. So we're going to bring it to right about there. That looks really good. Next, we're going to do the peak of our house here. We'll pull it up like that. Just make sure it covers up the corners of our window frames a bit. That looks really good. And you can see this coming into its own really quite quickly. It's really quite fast to do. And then you can take this and you can start adding shapes to the top of it. So you can add some snow shape to it, some domes to that, and so on, which will give you a nice sort of snowy look. You can add some domes, but limit their height to give you some definition between these bricks, which is also kind of nice. And you can do all kinds of things in the end to work on this. And if you wanted to, once you have this all done, you could simply go ahead and just create a component from the composite model and just smooth it all, and it would look equally as nice. Now the last step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put in these brick shapes. So let's go ahead and hold down our shift key, and we're going to select these shapes here. Make sure we get all these inside vectors as well. We're going to go ahead and create a shape. So it's going to be a dome shape. That looks good to me. No limit on that. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to subtract this. And we're going to click apply, and you'll see that we'll get those brick shapes added to our house there, right where they need to be. And that's great. And we'll close that down. Now, if we're not quite happy with the amount of depth we have in those brick shapes, we can go ahead and select them, and you'll see because I had added a shape height to that component when I created it, I've got this extra arrow here. Now I can go ahead and just give it a little bit more relief if I want to. It looks perfect just like that. I'm quite happy with that. That looks good. Now the last thing we might want to do is add a bit of snow to this. So let's just go ahead and grab these two shapes here, and we'll just go ahead and add some quick snow to the top of those. Give a little bit of shape to it. We're going to add that to the top, and maybe a little bit. We'll go ahead. We'll stick with that right now. We'll apply that, and we're going to close it. And then what we can do again, which is really kind of nice, select that shape, click it again, and we can go ahead and change this to be whatever shape we want, the amount of snow that we had this year. Also, if I feel like maybe there's a bit too much space here on that on the top of the chimney, I can just go ahead and find that shape that we have there, and I can go ahead and just pull that back to where it needs to be. And that looks pretty good. I'm really happy with that. So there we go. That's how easy it was to create that house in the end. When I was all done that, it was pretty easy because I did it all inside of that actual project. I just went ahead and created a component from my composite model, and then I could use that in my final layout. So let's go back to my final layout now. And here we are back to the file that you're going to receive with this project. Now you'll notice that there will be a sheet called house-model, and this is the actual sheet that I use to model the house on. So if you look at the modeling tab here, you'll see that I've included all the different components to build up this final composite model here, and all the levels are here. So you can break it down if you want to and have a closer look at it. Essentially what I did after that is I just went ahead and double clicked on the model and I said copy to the sheet, which was the the pine shelf sheet, which is my final layout, or where I wanted this actual piece to end up on my material that I was going to cut. So let's just go ahead and retile this just a slightly different way so we can get a better look at that. We'll bump over to our pine shelf sheet, and we can take a look at that in situ there. So there we have it, the house with the tabs as well. So let's quickly go over the tooling for this, and then we'll move on to a couple other things. So if we bring up our tool paths tab, you're going to see that we have a few different tool paths. Obviously we have a roughing and a finishing pass to cut the house and the reindeer, but we also have some pockets for our dowels and a VCarve tool path here, so we can go ahead and cut these numbers out. So these are little blocks that are going to go at the front of the project, so you can count down or count up the days of the month, or the countdown to Christmas. I'm only V-carving on the front side. I'm not actually going to profile cut these out until we do that, or until we flip it over to the back side. And you notice there's a little bit of extra space at the bottom. That's so that if I fit them in, or when I fit them in to the base, they'll still look centered as well. I've also added a couple tabs to the bottom of the house and reindeer. Again, those are just really basic models, basic flat planes that I've pulled up at a certain height so that I could make a channel in the base so I could slot these in. Now you'll notice that we have some 3D tabs here, and I mentioned I'd get back to that in a second. They're in there because I've scaled these two components up so that they are pretty much the full thickness of my material. And in doing so, if I didn't use actual 3D tabs, and after my finishing pass, these would actually fall out unless I had like an onion skin of material left behind. But these tabs will allow me to hold them in place. And the actual vector I'm going to use to do my roughing and finishing is an offset of the outline of my actual model. So that way I'll get away far enough from my component, and I'll expose these 3D components here of the tabs. And you'll see that in the preview of my tooling in a second. Now if we go ahead and flip this over, on the other side I've got the other set of numbers, and I also have the profile cutouts for the numbers. And also I've added in a slight little profile cut outside of my components here, mainly because I wasn't quite sure whether or not my material was really flat, and I wanted to not have to worry about trying to cut these out or have a hard time cutting them out of the material. So what this would ensure is that I actually cut away a little bit of material to expose those tabs. So all I had to do was just nip off those tabs and everything would be good. So let's go ahead and flip over to the other side again, and let's quickly go through our tooling here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut our dowel holes. Okay, this will allow us to be able to do the double-sided project. We're going to do a roughing pass and a finishing pass, and then we're going to do our V-carving. So let's go ahead and preview all of the visible tool paths that we have there. And when I do that, of course, in version 11.5, we can see the tool move around and we can twiddle around. If there's any issues or problems, we can go ahead and see those much easier than we could before in version 11 or before. There's our finishing pass going along there. Looks really good. And there's our V-carving. That looks great. Really good. So let's go to the other side. Now, in this case, we've got a second set of dowel holes. Okay, these, once I take the front cut off my machine, I'm then going to go ahead and run these dowel holes right into my spoil board. And that way, when I flip over my part, everything's going to line up perfectly. And then, so I need to do that first, and then I can go ahead and put my board back on my machine again. We're going to do some V-carving. We're going to do a profile cut of the numbers, and then we're also going to do that slight little profile cut around the 3D content here. So let's preview all those visible toolpaths. Let's just take a quick second to do. And I added in a snowflake on the back of one of the numbers because there was a blank spot. Thought that'd be kind of fun. So there you can see the end result of that. Now I've added in some extra tabs here because depending on the way your grain is going in your wood, some of these might be weaker than others. And as you'll see when we actually get around to cutting this in the labs, these did break out on me, which wasn't very safe. So adding in these extra tabs will help you a lot. And I'll discuss that a little bit later at the end of the video. But that's it. So that was pretty good. That's easy to do. It's an easy little project to cut for those parts. Now let's go ahead and have a look at the base here. This is simply made up from a bunch of pocket cuts. Now, I actually have a piece of wood that's exactly the right size that I want. So I'm going to have to use an interesting way to fixture this to my wasteboard. So I'm going to put down a long piece of wood. Then I'm going to double-sided tape this piece of material right up snug to it. And I'm going to put a second piece of wood to kind of make sure it's kind of clamped on its x-axis so that it won't slide around. The tape will hold it in place and it won't move. And that way I can use this exact side. I'm going to zero off the corner of this so that way everything will be lined up nicely. So I need to create some pockets for my reindeer and the house. Now, of course, I had to fill up the end of those to make them round so that they would fit in there nicely. My tool, of course, is round, so I needed to do that. And then I have the pockets for the numbers. Now this started out as a square with fillets on the corners. And then I decided to kind of rough it up a little bit to make it look a little bit sort of icy, maybe. That was sort of a design decision I made. I'm not sure if it was a good one or not, but I think it looks nice in the end. And then I've got this little channel here that we're going to use to cut here in case you wanted to put this on like your desk at your office. Using a nice ball nose end mill for this should round down the corners and make it look quite nice. Let's preview those visible toolpaths and see what we have. There we go. That actually looks pretty neat in the end. Now these are actually two different depths. That's why we have two tool paths for them. I needed to make sure that I had the depths correct for the tabs and for the little blocks and that extra little bit that I added to the bottom of those blocks to make sure everything was okay. Now, some of you might notice in the upcoming labs footage that this is not the file that I actually used to cut my project with. It's an edited version, but everything is pretty much exactly the same. Now I'm going to load in the cut file that I used, and I'm going to show you some things that I had to employ in our software to get around some of the difficulties I had with the material that I was using. Okay, the first thing you'll notice is that the pine shelf is much longer than the one that you have in your version. That's because the pine shelf that I had some imperfections in it, had some nail holes in it, had some really big knots in it, and also had a very strange little border around the outside because it was a pine shelf. So what I had to do in the software was I ended up creating a new layer called No Cut Zones. And that's red. And what I did was I measured off the board that I had. So this is the actual edge treatment that was on the board. So I didn't want to cut into that space. This area here is where there was some really big knots and there was a couple nail holes. This area over here had 2 nail holes in there. And this was the full length of the board that I had. So until I actually had all of my components built and everything, I wasn't quite sure how much of the board I needed. Now, another thing that happened that I realized in the end is that my board just fit on our CNC bed. And so what I had to do, and this is the first time I've ever done this, I had to actually use an offset for my start position. So if we go into my tool paths here and we pin this down and we go ahead and look at my material setup, you'll see that I used the offset right here. So I moved in the board 2 inches and up 1 inch, and that was where I was going to home my job. That way, and it worked really, really well. Like I said, I've never used that before, so you're going to see that happen in the video coming up. Also, I made a little mistake, and I ended up going up 1.5 inches in real life. So all of my parts were shifted up a little bit. So you'll notice that I get really close to that lip at the top of my chimney. The reindeer's quite close. And also at one point I thought I was going to lose these 2 numbers here. So I ended up using some space over here to create another set of numbers just in case I lost those in the end. In the end, I didn't. It worked out really well. And like I had said earlier, I went ahead and adjusted the tab locations of these cutouts here. Mine actually broke out, and so I've added some more tabs for you guys in the end to keep those in there nice and safe. But the idea of using a layer up here to keep track of your no-cut zones, I think is really important. So if you do have a board somewhere you want to avoid, just measure it off, put those vectors someplace so you know that you can't use that space. And so your version of this file really is just me taking these this sheet and sizing it down, moving the dowel holes around a little bit, and then recalculating the toolpath. So everything is pretty much the same. Now, one thing I didn't mention when we were going over the file that you're going to get is that when I actually cut all of these pockets and so on, I did use a slight allowance on those, that way to make them a little bit bigger so the parts fit in nicely. I wanted the reindeer in-house to fit in nice and tight, but I wanted extra room on these numbers. I didn't want to be people to fiddle around with them. I wanted them to feel nice when you put them in, and I think that we achieved that in the end. Yeah, so let's go ahead now and jump into the labs and see how this all cut.
I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. While I was actually creating the actual project, it really brought a lot of joy to me. It was a lot of fun to do. One of the things I would probably change, and I have updated in the file for you, is I would fix where I put the tabs on these little blocks. As you can see on this one, it actually broke out and it kind of mangled up the bottom a bit, which really wasn't all that safe, but I managed to actually save the part, so that was good. But I've fixed that in the file for you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do. We'd really appreciate that. If you make your own countdown calendar, please, we'd love to see it. So tag us in your social posts, or if you put it in the Vectric user forum, make sure that we see it there, okay? Anyway, thanks again for watching. Keep safe, have fun, and have a very Merry Christmas.